Welcome back to the Zero E Michigan podcast. I'm Carl Bloss, and my co-host is.
Larry Hudson.
And today we don't have a guest, but we want to talk about a topic that's near and dear to my heart is helping new EV drivers. And the reason this came into my mind in the last week or so, I've encountered 3 or 4 new EV drivers, either at public stations or they contacted me and said, "Hey, we have a new EV and we're not sure about some of this stuff." And so some of them, I mean, the one lady literally pulled up at a Tesla supercharger was a Nissan Leaf and was like pulling the cord trying to plug it in. I was like, no, 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 we need to have a little longer discussion. So I mean, it's embarrassing and it's funny to us, but really, when you start talking about connectors and networks and things like that, it's I mean, really, she wasn't doing anything wrong. It's just she didn't get any instructions from the dealership. The other thing that we're seeing is at Tesla superchargers in particular, there are a lot of Uber drivers that just show up and they rented this car, or the rental car drivers from Hertz. I think they're renting Model 3s and they're just showing up and they have no clue and they're not getting any instructions. So what I want to do in this podcast is maybe talk about some of those basics. Hopefully people like that will find their way here. But before I do that, before we started recording, Larry shared with me his first experience with getting a Tesla from renting it from Turo. So,
Toro.
Larry, tell us about that.
Yeah, yeah. So, um, I think I think I might have ridden in a Tesla at one of our. I've had a plug-in car since 2012, and I joined in 2010. I joined Kalamazoo Electric Vehicle. Well, it wasn't called that back then. It was Green Earth, Michigan. And Paul Pensello, who we just did a video with last week, he was on the board, and so then I got on the board with him. It just jumped right in. So I've been plugging in my Volt. Fast forward, they just released the Model Y, and I've been looking on Turo, and I wanted to rent a Tesla, but there was just Chicago, Detroit, so it was a whole day commitment, right? I had to drive 3-4 hours to get to one. Then all of a sudden, an hour away, there's a Model Y. I couldn't believe it. And so I quickly rented it, and then the following weekend was our annual get together. Anyways, uh, so I that guy, it was an hour drive, and that guy said I had a Volt, and he was looking to buy one for his daughter. So I put my Volt on Turo, drove the Volt up. He rented my Volt. I rented his Tesla, and he had sticky notes in there, and my brain just doesn't absorb stuff real quick. So I was really glad they had the sticky notes. Well, the minute I'm driving down the road, window open, whoosh, they all blow away. But that gave me an idea. And at one time when I was younger, I was getting my pilot license, and they have like these laminated, you know,
Cheat sheets or
yeah,
checklists.
cheat sheets. And then as a semi driver, same thing. You get these laminated sheets that what you need to run out and check your brakes, you know, uh, bulges on tires, hydraulic lines, that would cause the brakes or something to go or a tire to blow. Anyways,
Well, the
so
whole
you
point
you
is
know,
people don't know that. So
yeah,
it's
yeah,
helpful to
and
have something like that.
right, and remember, so when I got in that Tesla, it's the newest Model Y. I don't even think they've been out more than a month, and so I was so grateful. Anyways, that's what I came up, and I was imagining now in the semi, it's this big, you know, 12 by 10 sheet, and I thought maybe a long, thin 12 by 3 laminated, and even maybe flipping, so charging etiquette. So like with this gal at the Leaf, right away we could have charging, and then you would, I got a Leaf, and so it would come and it would show Leafs can charge here, here, and here. However, you could get these adapters if it turns out, and pretty soon, right? By the end of the year, everybody will be able to go to a Tesla supercharger with the right adapters.
I
That
don't
is
know
my
about by end
understanding.
of the year, but at some point in the future, I'm going to say 2025. But
Some Teslas have that magic dock,
oh, I see what
which
you're
would
saying. Yes.
the magic dock turns it into a J1772. Is that what I'm
No, a
understanding, right?
CCS turns it into a CCS,
Okay.
which doesn't help Leaf owners, by the way, because they're Chatamo. So I think,
Anyway,
yeah,
yeah.
what I wanted to do is maybe get some of the really big highlights of basics for EV. So if you just got an EV, it'll give you some ideas of where to start. So I wanted to kind of break it down. I'm looking off to the side here because I made some notes. So really, it's all about range and charging, right? So because driving the vehicle is not that much different. You still have the PRNDL, right? PRNDL, park, reverse, neutral, drive, low. That's still there. There's still an accelerator. There's still a brake. There's still a steering wheel. So from that aspect, really, there isn't that much different than an automatic vehicle. So range, it's all about the range indicator, and you're going to see battery percent, but people don't know what that means in terms of range. That's why EVs typically have some kind of an indicator in miles. Now, in the EV community, we lovingly call that the guessometer because it guesses your range based on your current driving habits. So I remember in the old days, my Nissan Leaf, those things weren't particularly calibrated very well. So you would see, back in the day, 80 miles of range. You're like, oh, great, I'm going to hop up on the highway. Then 2 miles later, it says 60 miles. Like, wait a minute, what happened
Right.
here? Right. So what happened is the vehicle said, oh, you're driving highway speeds. We know from our experience that driving on the highway due to wind resistance, you're not going to get the same range. So we're going to drop that down. Now, if somebody had banked on that 80 miles of range at the beginning, they're in for a rude surprise, right? And I think that's
Right.
what happened to this lady in the Leaf, where she thought she was going to drive from, I think it was the Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp, somewhere out into the Grand Rapids area, hopped on the highway, and all of a sudden, boom, she didn't have the range that she thought she would. And so then was struggling to figure out public charging. So I would say leave yourself a 30 to 40 mile buffer if you can, and then watch that buffer as you drive. So, for example, if your destination is 100 miles away and your guessometer says 140 miles, okay, that's good. So now you're driving along, now you have 50 miles left. And if it still says 90 miles and it hasn't decreased, or it says 35, it's like, okay, I'm on track to make it. But if all of a sudden your guessometer says, I only have 60 miles of range and you got 50 miles to go, that means somehow you ate up that 30-mile buffer. And that means you're probably going to overshoot and run out of battery, and you need to start looking for a charger. So that's typically what I do. Any advice on that, Larry? Is that about what you do
Well,
in terms of range?
real quick. So behind you, you conveniently put perfect your dash of your bolt. And you were telling me, so that red bar is equivalent to 5 miles. So that
It's
first
5%. It's
quarter,
a percent. Yeah. So for those that can't see it, it's a bar that shows the percent battery in little bars, and then it has a mileage estimate. And in my picture here, the mileage estimate, the miles already went away, and they just put low, which is super unhelpful, right? So now you're like, well, does that mean 10 miles or 1 mile? I have no clue. So it's just my experience that said, okay, well, with 5%, I know 1 mile per percent. So okay, maybe I got 5 miles left. But sure enough, when I got to the charger, I only had 4% left, which was I was burning through that battery much faster than I originally thought.
so in your conservative estimate, if you had a bolt, you wouldn't wait for that low light. That's cutting it too close. You would
That's cutting it too
as soon as
close.
as soon
Yeah.
as you're underneath this last white bar, that's around 25 miles, give or take. That's when you start looking for a charger, right?
Yeah, I mean, call it quarter tank, something like that. Unfortunately, where
Okay.
I was, there was no DC fast charger. That was along the way. I could have had a level 2 charger, that I knew from PlugShare, but the one I was heading for, I kept looking at it. It's like, okay, I think I'm going to make it. And then it did keep dropping down. Had I really been worried, what I would have done is gotten off the highway and taken some back roads, because just slowing down a little bit can make a huge difference because of the wind resistance.
Yeah, and again, since I had a Volt, I have the backup generator. And when I that first year I had it, so I've had one since 2012, 10 years. Um, I would play that game, trying to like how, and experimenting. How do I just stay on electric and not use the generator? And eventually, but like you said, the guessometer, the Volt, Chevy's done a pretty good job, though. I think most people say about the guessometer being pretty close. Is that your
Mhm.
experience too, Carl?
I can't say much for the Volt. My daughter has one, but I haven't driven it very much. I know in my case, I was going at highway speeds. It says 73. Actually, the speed limit was 75 where I was. So I did drop it down a little bit. I guess I'm a little bit surprised how much it dropped. And what also happens sometimes is when the battery is at a low state of charge, the calibration isn't always particularly good. My 2016 Zero DSR was particularly notorious for that. Anytime it got below 20%, all of a sudden it wasn't linear anymore. So, I knew that I should probably charge. So, particularly when you first got a vehicle, you want to give yourself extra buffer. I think that
Right,
that's
right.
that's maybe one of the messages.
And if you're not in a Tesla, at least for the next year, you can't count on the chargers all working. So you might have to have option A, option B, and option C, right?
Yeah, which is a good segue. So let's talk about public charging. So one of the first things I always tell people to do is get PlugShare. So plugshare.com, get the PlugShare app on your smartphone. It's free. Then put your vehicle in it, create an account, put your vehicle in it so it shows you the right connectors. So for example, if you put in a Kia Niro, it's not going to show you Tesla superchargers. You can filter those
Right.
on and off if you want. If you have an adapter for Tesla destination chargers, you can turn that filter back on. So that's a great app to have. And then particularly here in
Really good.
Michigan, there are a couple of big charging networks. You're going to want to get the apps and also create an account. And because a lot of these are paid stations, you're going to have to tie a credit card to it. So the ones that I can think of are ChargePoint. So chargepoint.com, Electrify America. Actually, you can Google all these. Blink charging, Shell Recharge. And so the way to do this is, again, get this smartphone app, create an account, and then tie a credit card to it. And that way, when you get to a paid station, then you're not fumbling trying to install an app at the last minute. And in an app like PlugShare, it will show you typically what network that particular charger is on.
And I know with ChargePoint, it was a $20 deposit.
Some of these charging networks, they work kind of like a Starbucks account, if you will. So you maintain a balance, right? So you have to put an initial amount in, or another one is Easy Pass if you're using that toll system. So you have a balance, and then you set it up so that when it drops below your dollar balance drops below a certain threshold,
It just read
it hits your credit card for another $10, $20, whatever you set up,
right, right.
rather
I
than
think
charging individual charges.
right. And I found that practical. I was fine with that.
Yeah. So the
And
only downside, I know some people say, well, for example, I have an EV Go account and I think I put 10 or $20 in there. And I think I've only ever used it once or twice in the St. Louis area. So I have this balance sitting there since forever, and it's not doing me any good. So if you get enough of these, you got a little bit of money tied up. I think that's the only downside. And then the other thing is, and we did a video on this, is get the RFID cards. Sometimes they
yeah.
they charge you $5, but you get this card in the mail, and that way, if your app isn't working, or if you don't want to use your smartphone or something like that, you've got the card. I used my Shell Recharge card the other day on a charger that was offline, and then this morning, like 3 days later, I get a statement from them, oh, you started charging. Oh, you got done charging. And so the RFID card will typically still work even when the station is off network.
I found the same thing with the ChargePoint. Kalamazoo had a lot of them, and then they went there because they were like $60 a month. I know the college was complaining about, hey, we got 10 or 20 of these things at $60 a month. It's really cost us a lot of money, and the charges aren't being used that much. And so the minute they were out of contract, they canceled that network, but you could still go up and use them,
Right.
like you
Then they
said.
would actually be free, but you still needed to activate with the card. You
And
can,
the college never charged. The college never
yeah,
charged anyway. So they were,
yeah.
most of them are free anyways, everywhere I went in
And they're not
Kalamazoo.
all like that anymore, but yeah, it's to me, it's worth it to get the card, even if it
Yeah,
costs you five
yeah.
bucks or something, because it can get you out of a pinch. And then road trips, planning tools. Now, if you have a Tesla, it's built into the navigation. You put in your destination, it will tell you which superchargers to hit along the way. So it's pretty straightforward. The only thing we have to say is that those people that are renting Teslas often don't get access to the app, so you can only do what's on the screen. So you're not going to get some of those notifications, for example, when your car is done charging. If you're a Tesla owner, the app will tell you, oh, you have, your car is almost done charging. Finish what you're doing and come back. You're going to get some idle fees, and then it will tell you, okay, you have enough to make it to the next destination, but it will still charging going up. Anyway, you'll get some feedback from the app. But if you're a renter, you're not going to get that. You're going to need to follow what's on the screen. And other vehicles don't have some of those same high quality planning tools built in. There are a couple of ways that I do it. PlugShare has a trip planner. It's pretty manual. So you basically put in your starting point and your destination, and then you kind of look at it and say, well, which chargers along the way would work for me? And you say, well, I know my car has, I don't know, a 200-mile range, so I'm going to stop every 150 miles or something like that. Or for me personally, I need to stop more often. I need caffeine. I need a pit stop. I'm going to say
Right.
every 100 miles or so. And then, you pick it that way. So it's very, very manual. The one that does the calculation for you is called a Better Route Planner, or ABRP. That's a free app for the basic features. There's some paid features that you can get where, for example, it'll tie into your vehicle and you get live data, things like that. I've never paid for one. I've just used the app, the free one, as a planning tool. Again, if you create an account online on a web interface, a large web interface, and you create that, you log in with that same account onto the smartphone app, whatever planning that you've done on the big screen will translate over to you, and when you can just pull it right up on your app and you have it there.
That's cool. Now Rivian bought that, right?
That's my understanding. Yeah, but I mean, it's still
So
available to anybody.
I hope. Yeah, I was wondering. I think I've heard some discussion. What's their plan? But like you said, it's a. I hear a lot of good stuff. Zach and Jesse are always
Yeah.
recommending it for all their road trips, and
Yeah, one
they
of the things I like about it is it has it's very customizable. So you can put your particular vehicle in, and it will take some boilerplate numbers in terms of efficiency, but you can tweak that. And that's one thing that I like to do. Now, I worked in data regression, so I understand a little bit about how this works. For example, the first time you take a test road trip, you say, okay, let me plan this out for my 2022 Kia Niro, and it tells me I'm going to get to my destination with, say, 32%. And then I'm gonna actually get there, and it's, oh, I get there with 40%. So the way I drive is actually more efficient than what the app says. So now I can tweak the efficiency in terms of miles per kilowatt hour a little bit, maybe try it again or try that calculation again and say, okay, now I'm gonna do the
wow,
calculation.
cool.
Now it's more dialed in with how you're actually going to use it.
And a long trip, right? That could be, instead of having to stop 10 times, you can actually do it in 8,
Right.
which
Yeah.
that would be helpful. Yeah.
And then another one of the really neat features is you can select and deselect and actually give preference to different networks. So, for example, I have friends who were planning their first road trip to Cleveland with a Volkswagen ID4, and they get 3 years of Electrify America for free. So they preferentially wanted to put
Right,
the
right.
Electrify America stations. So I set that up for them, and basically they can take the whole trip for free if they do it right. But I still showed them, like, here's how you add those back in. You can add EV Go back in, you can add ChargePoint back in, Blink, whatever, and then it shows you all these other charges. And so if you get in a pinch or you have an opportunity to opportunity charge, then you can find those chargers as well. Let's
Okay.
talk a little bit about home charging. On day one, remember that the car can be charged off of a regular 120 volt socket. And a lot of people forget that. They're like, well, how do I charge? I don't have charging at home yet. I'm going to need to run to a public charger. Well, chances are your vehicle did come with a charging cable. And the last two vehicles that I've seen, which were a Ford Mustang Mach-E and that ID4 from friends of mine, they both had the dual voltage charger with the inlet adapter. In a zippered pouch, there was the charge cable. It's a little box with a short lead on the input and a long lead towards the car. And on the short lead, they actually had two adapters. One goes to 120 volt, and the other one is the NEMA 1450, which is the 50 amp RV plug. So one day when they get their 50 amp circuit installed in their house,
Right,
they can use that
right.
one as well. But in the meantime, put that 120 volt in, plug it into an outlet, and trickle charge. You get 3 or 4 miles of range per hour. So 30, 40, 50 miles overnight, it's better than absolutely nothing. And, charge while you can.
And I think for most people, right? I know like with the Volt, GM's research said that most people don't drive more than 30, 40 miles a day. So that's the size of the battery. And it turns out to be in 10 years, that's the fact for me, that the 30, 40 mile range that I got on average was all I needed, right? The generator rarely kicks in, and that covers 90% of my trips.
Right. Yeah. My daughter's first year with her Volt, she went from August to November and never bought gas, and got a frantic phone call from her saying, Dad, I don't know how gas stations work. Right. So yeah, it's true for a lot of people. Obviously, it's use case, it's not true for everybody.
All right.
And then as far as going the next step for home charging, I would say contact your utility. Now, I'm going to be a little bit biased because I work for Consumers Energy, but I think all utilities have some kind of program now, with rebates or off-peak charging, things like that. It doesn't hurt. It's typically free, to ask, at least, to say, what are your programs? What can you do for me? And in our case, we also can connect you with an electrician. We can get you a $500 rebate towards that installation. And then we have a program, the Smart Charging Incentive, where you get $10 a month for 12 months for charging off peak, because we want to establish that behavior of off peak charging. So I would say definitely start there. If you have an electrician or somebody that you trust, contact your electrician. By now, most of them know how this works. The installation is nothing magic. It's a 240 volt, 50 amp circuit, very similar to an electric stove. Obviously, there's some different parameters. They have to put it in the garage. They have to maybe run some longer cable. It's possible it may need to go underground if you have a detached garage. So those kind of things, but an electrician can tell you and give you a quote, and then you can say, yeah, I want to do this, or no, I don't.
Right, right. And I think in that case, typically you're running a welder out in your garage, you're running a compressor, a larger compressor, both running on 220, and the car will be the same. However, of late, it has shown that your average 220 NEMA 1440 outlet for like a welder, a compressor, a dryer, is only really designed to run for 30 minutes at a time. And when you got a big car, like let's say the F-150 truck or a Tesla P100D, and it's pulling what, 40 amps for 10 hours straight, it is heating up the plugs. So you want to make sure you let your electrician order the higher quality plug, right? It
Yeah,
has what's that rating called? It has a duty cycle. Is that the one?
there are plugs that are rated for, for a higher duty cycle, meaning you're going to be running longer and, at a higher power level. If you think about like a stove or like you said, a welder, you're going to use those for short periods of time. EV charging is considered continuous use because it's typically over 3 hours. And what that means is right off the bat, you need to only run it at 80% of the circuit capacity. So a 50 amp circuit, you can only run a 40 amp charger. But more and more, we are seeing you need at least a high quality outlet to plug into, because
Yes,
otherwise
yes.
those connections, they're just not designed for plugging, unplugging, and continuous charging, not charging. So you're heating up, you're cooling down. So, expansion, contraction, you're going to lose some of those connections with the pins and the wiring and things like that. So get a high
Yeah, yeah.
quality
So
outlet.
just make sure
Yeah.
exactly the outlet
Yeah.
needs to be a higher quality.
Yeah. Don't cheap out there.
Don't don't cheap out there, because there was a guy with a Porsche and then he upgraded to the Lucid. So we have
Mhm.
a buddy of ours that used to work at Tesla, now works for Lucid. He said he went there, and when he unplugged it, the all that plastic around the little things were just burned away. And the guy was like, "Yeah, I smelt a little weird smell every now and then when I'd walk in the garage." And so that's scary to think, right?
Right. And I know some people like Tom Malachny on State of Charge, they're even recommending just go hardwired. In other words, do away with the plug altogether. Get an electrician to basically put together a junction box. That's an option too. It's really not that much more expensive. If you need to move, then to unwire that is not hugely expensive.
Good point. Good point.
Larry had this idea of what can we do to make things better. What about the laminated cheat sheet? Is that something we should be developing?
Right, right. It makes me think about Brian, who came out at our last Tesla meetup. He has the channel, My Tesla Weekend. What a great guy. But at the end, he's always saying, what did I miss? What did I forget? Please comment below, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's so true, because you just
Yeah, we don't
know.
have all the answers. We can talk about it, but yeah, if somebody
But
has a
we will
clever
start
idea.
working on doing that.
So I think if you just have it handy, just have on there,
Right. Right.
download the PlugShare app, and here's the QR code to go there.
There you go. Yeah.
Here are the major networks in Michigan. If it's for, this is our zone of influence here, get ChargePoint, get Electrify
I
America,
guess I
Blink,
was
and so
thinking
on.
for the Tesla, like the autopilot, 2 clicks, and
Yeah, but that's
blinker.
already advanced. You're not going to be stuck if you don't know how autopilot works. But if you can't charge the car, then you could have a
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah. But why I wanted it right on the dash, because the guy had sticky notes, and I was like, oh, perfect. Because again, I have to use it 3-4 times before my brain gets it. And then the sticky notes fall off, and then I'm trying to stick them back on.
So let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Thanks, Carl.
If you enjoyed or learned from this episode of Zero E Michigan, please subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform. Visit our YouTube channel for other related videos at youtube.com/@0E-Michigan.